So lately, when it comes to Nintendo Switch 2 related stuff, I've been kind of taking the piss out of a lot of stories just because I'm not quite sure how I feel about the sources and some of the stuff surrounding the situation. But when it's a source I know and I trust, I tend to want to talk about it a little bit more, and that's the situation we have going on today. My fellow co-host of the Game and Talk podcast over on the Spawncast Network. Make sure you're checking out the Spawncast Network. Tons of exclusive content from people on there. But Nate the Hate made a video yesterday talking with Modern Vintage Gamer, the old smelly Englishman, about the Nintendo Switch 2 and dropped some new nuggets of information that we really haven't heard much of before, and even touched on some things that we have heard before. So I want to talk about all this stuff because it's interesting, it's fun. Don't get mad at the messenger, get mad at, I guess, Nate or something like that. If this is your first time here, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Be sure to like the video as well. But without any further ado, let's talk about what was discussed. Now, we're not going to talk about every single thing that he talked about in that video. I will have a link to it in the description box down below so that you can check that out on your own time. It's definitely a very good listen. He has a very nice voice, unlike the Britishman. But kicking things off, we have the talks about the two Nintendo Switch 2 SKU models. Now, this was something that we talked about, I believe, like a week or so ago, that allegedly one system was going to be like an all-digital system, and one system was going to be a system that takes physical cartridges. Now, as far as this topic is concerned, Nate says that he has heard things about the potential for two different SKUs, but nothing he could really confirm or that he was willing to sort of put his reputation on the line for when it came to something like that. And he didn't really hear anything about an all digital SKU as well. And I've always said, you know, the all digital SKU, I just don't really buy it, especially on launch day, because of the whole fact that, yes, I'll just reiterate it, that Japan is Nintendo's favorite market. Might not be the strongest in terms of sales, but they're obviously a very Japanese company. And when it comes to Japanese consumers buying video games, well, time and time again, they prefer physical over digital, especially when it comes to the Nintendo Switch. Over 76% of all game sales on the Nintendo Switch in Japan are via physical material. So, you know, I just don't see them completely, you know, alienating that portion of the market. And it's not even necessarily that they would be alienating them, but if they sold that in the Japanese market, they wouldn't sell as many games, I feel. And I feel like from a business standpoint, you know, they got to be looking at the numbers with this. They got to be looking at what's best for them. If it was a company like Sony or Microsoft, both of which have introduced an all digital SKU already, but don't quite have that same presence as Nintendo does in Japan, then it might make a little bit more sense for them to do the all digital systems. But with Nintendo, I just feel like we're at least one generation away, not this upcoming generation, but maybe the generation after that. That's when we'll start to see an all digital SKU come out to us from Nintendo, because obviously the market will have potentially shifted a little bit. So I thought that was pretty interesting, you know, neither confirming nor denying the status of two Nintendo Switch SKU models, saying that it was something that has been discussed, it's come his way, but as far as an all digital one is concerned, he's a bit murkier on that. But things get really interesting when it comes to the DLSS side of things, because we've gotten some reports out of stuff like Gamescom talking about, you know, there was a Nintendo Switch 2 behind the scenes running stuff like the Matrix demo, potentially Final Fantasy VII Remake, Breath of the Wild at an enhanced visual resolution and an enhanced frame rate as well. I know what you're saying. I just don't think that that's a willy-nilly, you know, standard Nintendo Switch version of the game running. I think that's kind of an enhanced version of the game that's going to be specific to the system, but that was running at 4K 60 frames per second. And DLSS is obviously going to be a very powerful component when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2 system, because it's an NVIDIA product, and it makes perfect sense for that to be a focal point of it, because it allows lower end hardware to do some very impressive things. But there's different types of DLSS. Now, I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm a wizard or well versed in all this sort of stuff, but I do understand the key differences between something like DLSS 2.0 and DLSS 3.1 versus DLSS 3.5. Now, one thing that DLSS 3.5 offers that the other versions of DLSS do not is something called ray reconstruction, and that is not just technically possible but viable to use. use for the Nintendo Switch 2 system. Now, this would be something that would only be available sort of in docked mode for this system. It obviously wouldn't, you know, if we're talking about handheld with DLSS 3.5 and ray reconstruction, that would absolutely eat up the battery in just a massive amount of time. But when you look at Nintendo Switch games as they stand now, I mean, usually there's a bit of a contrast between a game in handheld mode and in docked mode. Some games in handheld mode can dip as low as like 300p, and then when they're in docked mode, they can go up to 1080p. So that's a pretty stark difference in sort of visual quality. And, you know, it depends what game is being played and what game is utilizing any sort of the technology with the current Nintendo Switch, but it makes sense because 9 times out of 10, even 9.5 times out of 10, the docked experience is looking sharper than the handheld experience, because the handheld portion of the system is only a 720p screen. You're going to notice a bit of a visual jump in fidelity when it comes to stuff like this. So that makes perfect sense for me as far as being there and being potentially useful. Now, this makes the system very interesting in terms of, I guess, just like general power, because it's not necessarily like real power, it's artificial intelligence power that is being used for this, but it makes it a bit of a cut above of like what AMD is doing, because DLSS 3.5 is way more advanced than something like Fidelity FX that AMD uses with their artificial upscaling. And we've already seen some games on the Switch use stuff like AMD Fidelity FX. Of course, games like Nintendo Switch Sports utilize that. So I think that the level of visual fidelity that you're able to do and potential ray tracing, which I don't like ray tracing. I'm sorry, like, I've played games with ray tracing and stuff. I don't really see, like, it's kind of cool, but I don't know, it's just not a huge deal to me. I would rather have a game look and run smooth than have to deal with stuff like ray tracing, which usually lowers the frames per second. But once again, when it comes to artificial intelligence, the DLSS 3.5 can allow you to run ray tracing and potentially get higher frame rates than what you got initially. Now, that doesn't seem like that's going to be a part of the Nintendo Switch 2's DLSS stuff. Once again, I'm basing all of this from Nate because of the fact that that uses an artificial like frame skipping thing, which I'm not gonna act like I know what the hell that's talking about, but it doesn't look like the Switch will be or the Switch 2, I should say, will be utilizing something like that. A bunch of mumbo jumbo technical stuff, I know, but at the end of the day, essentially what this system is going to be capable of, if all of this information is right, it's something very visually impressive. It is supposedly a 100% customized system on a chip, or SoC card, for the Nintendo Switch and 2, and there's nothing really like it on the market that compare to it. Nate even went to say that, you know, in terms of being outdated, because that was something that kind of happened with the Nintendo Switch. Like, it was awesome to be able to play these games in handheld mode, but as time went on, other systems came out and stuff like that, other handheld systems and whatnot. You know, the Switch definitely started to look a little bit rough around the edges, and of course some of the games weren't able to hit, you know, 60 frames. Some of the games weren't even able to hit 30 frames per second, you know, even like sort of half first party games like Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, and even times with Breath of the Wild, you know, there wasn't hitting 30 frames per second at times. Well, this new system on a chip allegedly is going to be so, you know, different because of the fact that it's being made by NVIDIA specifically for the Nintendo Switch 2, because you got to remember, the Tegra X1 chip used in the Nintendo Switch 1 was something that NVIDIA used for other projects that they had going on at the time. But this being a custom chip utilizing DLSS 3.5, Nate's saying that it's not going to look outdated anytime soon because of the fact that it has all this artificial upscaling and artificial technology that will essentially allow Nintendo to maybe not necessarily future-proof the system, but you can constantly update DLSS if it's within the chipset that you have. So, you know, you can do system updates to allow different versions of DLSS to make things look and run better in the middle of a system's life cycle. Now, of course, raw power is still needed to some degree, but the whole point of DLSS is so that smaller scale systems, you know, systems that aren't quite as strong, can run games at higher resolutions and higher frame rates than they could natively because of this artificial upscaling. Honestly, it sounds pretty exciting. And maybe, you know, some people have been kind of undermining, maybe I'm one of those people, have been kind of undermining what this system will be capable of in terms of visual fidelity. I think it'll be very interesting though, because it does sound like a decent size leap in terms of performance and visual resolution than what we have on the standard Nintendo Switch. And I wonder how Nintendo themselves will sort of be able to adjust to that. You know, how will they do this? You got to remember, they weren't doing HD games until the Wii U. And then they really didn't do many games on the Wii U because nobody bought the damn thing. So, you know, they're still kind of getting their feet wet as far as a development standpoint of a lot of these HD games in terms of what you can actually do. The art style always shines, but imagine that art style, but a bit more refined for more powerful technology and stuff like that. I'm very excited to see what will happen with this, though. I think it sounds very promising and it sounds really good. So like I said, I have the link to Nate the Hates video in the comments section down below. Go check out the whole video because there's a bunch more stuff that is discussed in there, but I'm definitely feeling pretty positive about this system. And you know, he says in the video, it's still looking like a second half of 2024 release, which I think that makes the most sense. I saw some people talking about maybe they'll show it off in November, and it's like, no. They're not going to show it off before March because March 31st is the end of the fiscal year for Nintendo. Like, that just doesn't make any sense. You want to get people excited for the second half of 2024 or the first half as far as the business physical years are concerned, since it's March to March. And that's a great way to do it, by introducing new hardware. Anyways, guys, let me know what you think of all this in the comments section down below. And as always, thank you guys for checking out this video. Like I said at the start, if you are new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button, like, comment, and share. Hit the bell as well. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.